Hello and welcome to Age of Air, a podcast about astrology, tarot, and magic. I'm your host, Rebecca Dean, and today we're going to talk about the final week of January 2021. As usual, I'd like to just recap last week, the third week of January, a bit. Unfortunately, it was really quite the week for me personally and not the most pleasant of ways, thanks to Mars and Uranus. Thanks, guys. The exact conjunction between Mars and Uranus happened on January 20th, but I personally felt it a day earlier on the 19th, and how that manifested for me was basically a volatile, borderline, super aggressive, extremely unexpected episode at work that really threw me for a loop and was extremely unpleasant. So unfortunately, and I was feeling that in my personal life. Luckily, some of the other manifestations I mentioned did not happen. I was watching the inauguration of Joe Biden on Wednesday with bated breath, since that was definitely a day that had the potential for some sort of dramatic, surprising, violent act. But luckily, it did not happen. And I felt like the message overall in the inauguration was very clearly this new air, inclusive age of air energy, this very much in the Aquarian spirit. It was interesting to hear that. It's very much with the times of this new shift that we have started, and one that was most definitely a breath of fresh air for me to hear, as I'm sure it was for many, many people in the world. And besides that, there was a couple of, the other manifestation I mentioned were earthquakes. There were a couple of little earthquakes, I believe, on the 20th or the 19th. I'm not quite sure. There was one in Los Angeles, and then there was a slightly larger one in Chile. So we did see some seismic energy last week. I don't really follow that myself. Could be that's even normal to have at different times, but it would be a typical manifestation of this Uranian mixed with Saturn and Mars, especially kind of energy. But other than that, I'm recording this on Thursday the 21st, so hopefully nothing is still coming this week, because it has been quite a week, at least for me personally. I hope not for you. I hope it was a smoother week and it didn't affect you as much. But so far, I think we came across pretty unscathed, which was great. But let's move on to the final week of January 2021. There are several things to mention astrologically that are a big deal next week. Not quite as dramatic as the potential of the third week of January that is now past, but there's still definitely some very significant things. The first one is on Tuesday, January 26th. On that day, the sun, which is now in the sign of Aquarius, is going to be squaring Uranus, okay? That could, all of the astrological aspects that can manifest in several different ways. I mean, the sun can often stand for a solar figure. So, for example, the solar figures are fathers, leaders of all kinds, also famous people or people who have large social standing. And this could speak to that sort of a figure coming into a scuffle with this rebellious, revolutionary energy that we've already seen. It could also very well be, since I've talked before about Saturn and Jupiter being in Aquarius, or that Aquarius was the sign that kicked off this new 200 plus year air cycle. It could be those sorts of new ideas, new plans, new ideas for structure, what Joe Biden talked about, unity and bringing people together, those kinds of things. And then that other rebellious, let's rip everything down, burn it to the ground kind of energy coming in, and there being some sort of tension between them, okay? Again, a square, as I've said before, is a dynamic aspect that brings in a lot of contention, a lot of heated, possibly even sometimes aggressive energy. So we could see a little bit of that, and also impatience as well in general. Uranus is a energy that is a now energy. Let's do this now. Let's not wait. So there could be a bit of that as well. As far as it could be showing up in your personal life, sun can also stand for your mind or your identity. So what it is as you see as your sense of purpose in life. And a squared Uranus could be the urge to kind of to break free, maybe have change that could be too sudden change, because Uranus, again, wants to have a breakthrough. It wants to innovate and accelerate. And if it's in a square aspect to the sun, how it could be picked up would be that you'd say, okay, enough is enough. Now is when the change needs to happen, whereas possibly it's something that still needs to wait a bit. Okay. Okay, the next big one is the moon cycle that started on the 13th, when we had new moon on the 13th of January, and that's going to culminate in the full moon in Leo on the 28th of January. The energy in the full moon is very intense this time. It doesn't look very pleasant. To my mind, I would say if you have high emotions on that day or feel extreme tension or extremely frustrated or like your will is thwarted, I would say don't take it too seriously. This full moon is going to bring up those kinds of feelings. The energy in a lot of ways is quite similar to the new moon energy because there's going to be an opposition to Saturn in Aquarius on that day. There's going to be a square to Uranus. And all of these are the moon, so what the moon is doing. And there's going to be an opposition also to Jupiter and a square to Mars, okay? So, and Leo is the sign in the zodiac that has its home or its domicile in the sun. So it could also stand again for some sort of a leader or solar person, and that they're meeting some sort of opposition. There could be tension, there could be aggression, there could be the same sort of revolutionary, thwarted will kinds of feelings that we're dealing with. Okay, so again, not a very pleasant day, but if it's affecting you, I would say wait it out. In a couple of days, the energy will dissipate. There is on that day another extremely interesting aspect that comes into play, which also is similar to what let me actually take a look on the 13th. What was it on the 13th? Right. On the 13th, Pluto also came into play. Pluto was conjunct the moon. And on the 28th, Pluto is going to be conjunct Venus. And Pluto is a very interesting planet. Also, like any of the outer planets, really, so Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, it's intense energy that is not, in some ways, not very easy to handle. In my opinion, also not usually very personal. It's sort of transpersonal. They call them the outer planets, and they stand for something larger than us in many ways and bring in larger kinds of energies. In many ways, I mean, I think Pluto is quite an apt name for the energy of this planet because it really brings in an underworld kind of flair. Okay, Pluto brings us into the underworld in both good ways, so it's sort of a cathartic release or a cathartic journey that brings you into new revelations. Usually not a pleasant one. Sort of more similar to maybe, I don't know, a near-death experience than to enlightenment, because Pluto is a very intense, darker and heavy energy. But again, catharsis can be wonderful as well. It also can be bring in something even darker and heavier and dirtier. Pluto is also definitely the planet that rules, for example, organized crime or anything that's hidden in the depths and more intense, and something that maybe perhaps that people have a hard time looking at, or that is the shadow of humanity or how they would like to imagine themselves, okay? And so any of those kinds of things could come up. And as far as it being Venus, Venus is means that this could involve women in some way. So, yeah, famous women or women in your life, or you personally if you're a woman. It could also involve something to do with the arts, with romance, sexuality, relating, anything like that. Could really become into a cathartic kind of situation, and again, one that could be painful and difficult perhaps, but potentially could still be powerful and important. Okay, so it's an interesting energy for sure, not lighthearted and easy to deal with perhaps, but one that could in the long run be rewarding. So that's interesting to see for next week. The next day is January the 29th, Friday, January the 29th. And on that day, the sun in Aquarius is going to be conjuncting Jupiter in Aquarius. Okay. So again, we have the solar figure sun. So either literally fathers, leaders of all kinds, famous people, especially could be something like that. And it's meeting up with Jupiter. And I think in some ways what that could possibly mean, in this case, Jupiter could be alliances, for example. It could be a sense of justice. Again, justice maybe in this new Aquarian way that we're seeing in the world for having a new approach and structuring things in a different kind of way. Or it could just really emphasize in a positive way these new ideals that we're building both in the collective and in our personal life with this new Aquarian energy. As far as in your personal life, this would be a great day to expand your mind. So, for example, any sort of intellectual or especially since this is an air sign that we're talking about, any intellectual pursuits would be great, philosophical pursuits. This would be a fantastic day to meditate and think deep thoughts, think deep and lofty thoughts. So if nothing else, take it away as that sort of day where maybe if you can get away with it, take a little meditation retreat in your living room, since most of us never leave our living rooms or bedrooms or kitchens these days. Possibly there's a park nearby, or you could go sit by a stream with your mask on if people are nearby. Anything like that would be a great thing to do on the 29th. And yeah, so enjoy that. On the 30th of January, so almost the very last day here, we have something that most people who know even the slightest bit about astrology have heard of, and that is that Mercury is going retrograde. It's going retrograde at 28 degrees of Aquarius. And again, a lot of people know the Mercury retrograde things because Mercury goes retrograde several times a year. And this is something that really people can observe, or that is quite common during these times. And that's that mercurial things stop working very well. That's really the case when any planet ever goes retrograde, whatever that planet signifies. Those types of things can kind of get thrown for a loop. So when it's Mercury retrograde, the kind of things that can happen is, for example, travel can not be working very well because Mercury rules travel. You can have communication problems. Mercury definitely stands for communication. So that kind of thing can happen. You can have issues with computer or technology, also something that Mercury rules. And so anything like that, it can be something that happens that you should watch for. It's also, I personally think I've heard some people who get really uptight about this and, I should never make any plans. I mean, again, not that anyone makes plans anyways these days, but I shouldn't travel on that day or that sort of thing. But I think that's not really the way to approach it. You still have to live your life, even if it's Mercury retrograde, but it's still not a bad idea maybe for this. Let me check actually how long that's going to be. It's usually around for several weeks. Oh, Lord. When is Mercury not going to be retrograde? It is not going to be retrograde anymore on... Oh, I found it. On the 21st of February. Okay, so it's going to be for several weeks that you're going to be dealing with this retrograde energy, and my advice is just to keep it in mind. And if you're traveling, for example, if you do actually get the chance to travel, then leave early in case these kind of typical Mercury retrograde snafus happen. If you're communicating, maybe read that email through a couple times so that those typical Mercury retrograde miscommunications don't happen, that sort of thing. So just be mindful of it, but definitely don't stop your life or think you have to go hide in a hole or something until Mercury's direct again. One thing I would suggest, though, is perhaps don't buy electronics during this time. It's not really the best time to buy electronics during a Mercury retrograde. You could get lucky, or you could get that limit of a laptop or the phone that, keeps on not working. So it's maybe not the best time for that. But other than that, I would say just chill and relax and maybe just be mindful of it. As far as what Mercury retrograde means, or what any planet retrograde means, is that it's a going back and reviewing what has already happened since in the time that this planet has been in this certain sign. So since Mercury is currently in Aquarius, it's going to be going back and revisiting these new Age of Air, Aquarian energy principles that we've seen emerge this month in many different ways, both in the collective and our personal life. Looking at them, examining them, testing them, saying, okay, what has worked here, what maybe needs to still be perfected or changed in certain kinds of ways. So that's sort of the power of the retrograde cycle, and one that it's also good to keep in mind for your personal life as well. Maybe you started some new ideas, you started a new plan for how you're going to restructure something in your life, then I would use this period to really say, okay, I'm going to go back and I'm examine and see how is my plan standing up? Is there a few things that maybe aren't going to work, or that sort of thing? That would be a very useful way to use this retrograde energy of Mercury and Aquarius going seemingly backwards for a while in the sky until February 21st. Okay, so that's it for the final week of January. I, for one, am going to be glad January's over. It has not been an easy month, but like I've mentioned before on this podcast, it is one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging month in the year of 2021. So from here on out, I'm not going to lie and say it's smooth sailing, but there will be times that are not as challenging ahead, and there will be even pleasant times this year later in the spring, which I am looking forward to. I personally would just like to leave the city of Berlin, or God, the country. Will that ever happen again? Or go to a restaurant or the opera? Wow. Yeah, I have a feeling that you might be feeling the same way, so I hope that we get a chance to do that soon. I hope that you're doing well and that you're staying safe and that you're keeping yourself busy with positive projects and new ideas, if nothing else, even if you're stuck at home like pretty much the whole world. As far as what I'd like to mention, as I always do at the end of this podcast, is this podcast is part of my newsletter at ageofair.substack.com. Please come by and subscribe. It's completely free of charge, and that's where I publish both this podcast as well as extra texts about astrology, tarot, and magic. I also always do a tarot reading of some kind for each week as well, which I write about there. So if you're interested in that, then check it out and swing by ageofair.substack.com again, in case you missed it the first time. And I hope to see you there. Until then I guess I'll be speaking to you again in February. Okay, take care. Until then, bye-bye.